The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viado. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Yvonne Tally, and she is the author of Breaking Up with Busy. And I just love that title because I feel that it just so captures a dilemma that many women, well, actually men also, but since we're focused on women, experience. And so just very excited that she's going to be talking to us about this process that women get caught up in, why it happens, and specific things to do to begin to change this experience. Yvonne, in addition to being the author of Breaking Up with Busy, leads meditation and de-stressing programs for corporations, individuals, and private groups in Silicon Valley. A Neuro Linguistic Programming master practitioner, Yvonne co-founded Poised Inc, a Pilates and wellness training studio, and is the founder of the Sisterhood of the Traveling Scarves, a charity that provides headscarves to cancer patients. Hi, Yvonne, and welcome.
It's great to be with you, Lourdes.
Thank you so much for being here. I know that our conversation is one that's going to really be meaningful for many of our listeners. So I just wanted to start off with asking you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I work with primarily women. Of course, that has expanded now to corporations and private groups as well that include all types of people. And I was, at the time, so busy teaching how to live a vibrant and healthy lifestyle, growing my business and raising my daughter as a single mom, that I missed my own signs of busy and overscheduled. And when I ended up in the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack, when in fact I was having a panic attack, never had one before and thankfully have not had one since, but it was brought on by my stress levels and my inability to not only to see those signs and signals, but to do something about them before they got to the point that they did. And so that scared me enough to make a huge lifestyle shift. And that is what inspired me. That first big inspiration came from this experience. And what was so interesting about that for me, Lourdes, was that in that moment when I was in that hospital thinking I was having a heart attack and so relieved to find out that it was a panic attack, but yet at the same time, I felt embarrassed. I was ashamed because here I had been in the health and wellness business all these years, teaching people how to live this vibrant, well lifestyle. And here I am, an organic eating, exercising, meditating, positive thinking person. And I had ignored my own signs of wellness. So that was a wake-up call for me. And I thought, I've got to come up with solutions, not only for myself, but for my clients, and extending beyond that to help as many as I can. And what was ironic about that was I had been teaching my clients all of these different techniques for mindfulness and practical solutions, sprinkling it in throughout our sessions. And yet I wasn't applying them to my own life on a really healthy, consistent manner. So I put that together and birthed the book, so to speak. And that's how we came to where we are now.
Wow, what an experience. When you were describing all the things that you were doing, to take care of yourself, and then the irony that here, you find yourself in this hospital. I can see why you kind of have to, kind of put the brakes on and say, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah, and I think it shows us that even with the healthy eating and the exercising, if we don't have our mind space set, if we don't have the mindset to really take those consistent periods of time throughout our day and throughout our week to self-nurture and self-care, that this can be something that can really escalate into not only a health situation, but it can deteriorate our relationships, our intimacy within our relationships, and it can impact our careers, our families, all of that. And let's not forget, if we are doing it, we are also teaching others that we influence in our lives and the generations coming up from behind us to do the same. So it's women are affected by this busy culture much more than men, but we are all in this together. And it's really time that we put the brakes on, so to speak, and pause enough to adopt solutions, bring practices within our lives, and not make it an option anymore. It really is essential to our wellness and health.
And I love how you spoke about, we do all these external, quote, healthy things, and they're healthy. However, if you're not doing the inner work, that is actually, it's not going to really help no matter what you're doing on the outside if you aren't able to get that inner peace. And I say inner peace, and I'm thinking of peace, both meanings, that peace, that's an important piece, and it also helps bring you peace,
Yes, it does. 100%. And it's a balance between all of them. I was speaking with a client, and her question was, how can you ask us to do these other things when we're trying to break up with busy? It feels like it's one more thing that I have to do. And I said, well, it's a valid point. That's a valid perspective. It's certainly how, and let's unwrap that a little bit, because what's important is that we select what we are doing, feeling, and thinking in our day. We can't always do it 100%. It's unlikely that as human beings, we will be consistently mindful and present. But the more you practice these different practices and solutions, the more they will then move from being a practice to being a habit. And then once it becomes a habit, that's when we can start to engage in that habit almost on an unconscious but productive level. So it's important that we choose what it is that we're going to bring into our life and how we're going to maneuver our day in a way using practices and skills and solutions and thoughts to help us do that. So it's not about adding things to our list. And it's not about blaming other outside forces or sources. It's about, what do I want to create? What do I want to bring into my life? And now how can I move into a solution-based thinking and make that happen?
Yeah, and I know we're going to delve into this juicy stuff as we go, but just that, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of my own clients, and everything is equally important. It seems, it's very difficult to do that discerning editing process. So I love that you go into that in the book, and there's steps that readers can take to begin to do this process of determining what is important for me and what can I let go, and just continuing with that. This is wonderful. I also especially was drawn to the beginning of your book, which you started off by saying that I'm busy is now the new I'm fine. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting because our culture is so overexposed nowadays and technology has everything, if not most of everything, to do with that transition, certainly. But, there was a time in our culture when we were more private. We were not about revealing every moment, every corner, every nook and cranny of our life. And it was that I'm fine, how we greeted one another. It was acceptable. It was basically a way to not only engage, but exit a conversation at the same time. It protected our privacy. So what has happened now is the I'm fine, would project this image of having it all pulled together. And so how did we go from fine to busy? Well, there's a few things that's happened. Economics are a part of that. When economics rise, time is seen as more valuable. So we don't want to waste it. So we pack in as much as we can to every day and every moment. And we get very busy. And there's this somewhat of a status symbol attached to being busy. It makes us feel more important and more valuable. And when we are in a group, we all have our group, our social group, our inner group as far as our life goes. And when other people are doing certain things for us to be a part of that group, we are going to do that same thing, or at least similar. And so busy has become part of what it is that we do as a culture. You're busy, I'm busy, you get me, I get you, we can move on from here. And because of this status symbol attached now to being busy, getting it all done, feeling important, always having things on my schedule, the idea that when we greet one another now, instead of saying, how are you, I'm fine, that's almost a put off. It's almost a feeling of, gee, this person doesn't really want to engage with me. But when I say, I am so busy, you're going to say back, not you, but you as the third, out there, that you, I am too. I know it's such a busy, everything's just so busy. And it becomes this engagement that we have, an understanding and a connection. And when we think about it, that's really what it is. It's a connection. It's a place to be in a world where we can have a sense of importance. And what I find fascinating about that, many things, but what I find fascinating about that, you go back a few generations and the leisure class, if you were leisure, then that meant, oh, you must be doing really well. You must be well off financially. You must be well off in your personal life because you have this leisure time. And leisure time, I call leisure, has now become the new lazy, where there's almost this stigma attached if you're not, quote, doing anything. And it's been replaced with this busyness. So a few things play into that. One of them is economics. Technology has a big part to do with that as well.
Wow, that is just so amazing how, all of these pieces you can even see this. I'm thinking, as a mom, the tendency to do the same thing to our kids, overschedule them, back-to-back activities. And again, not really, I guess, emphasizing or focusing or putting the same attention on stillness, quiet. We don't need to go do something every second of the day. Even children begin to get trained in this.
Oh, absolutely. Because who are they learning from? If we're engaging with our child, with our children, and our face is on our, looking down at our phone, and they're saying, Mom, are you listening to me? I heard everything that you said, because we're multitasking and we're trying to get all sorts of things done. And we are buying into the idea that if we're multitasking and we're doing all these other things, that we are getting more done. So we're really respecting and honoring, quote, honoring that time well spent. But what are we doing for our children? We're teaching them exactly to not pay attention. We're teaching them how to be effectively, or not, I should say, not effective, to be distracted. And so then we get upset with them and say, why aren't you paying attention? Are you listening? Did you hear what I said? When they're on their phones or doing something else. So it really does trickle out. Everything that we do affects those that we share our life with. And when it comes to being busy, and by the way, the mind cannot differentiate between two dissimilar tasks. So even though we want to believe that multitasking works, it does not. It increases errors, it increases frustration, and it also gives us that distraction and that lack of attention to what it is we really need to be doing. So what happens when we have a lack of attention? We don't experience it. So at the end of the day, we have that mixed feeling of doing way too much, but not enough, because we weren't really in that moment to begin with. And again, as I always say, we can't expect ourselves to be 100% present in the moment every moment of the day. But practicing mindful practices allows us to get back into that moment. And what that creates when we're paying attention, it creates, again, emotional intimacy in our relationship. And it also allows us to have the experience in a much more rich way.
I wanted to switch gears, Yvonne, and go to, I think, a wonderful acronym that you've created. And this is the Overscheduled Woman, or the OSW. So can you describe who she is and how women can begin to discern if they fit into this category, if they can describe themselves as overscheduled women?
Yes. And I think most women have felt like an overscheduled woman.
Yeah.
For certain. Yeah. So the overscheduled woman, the OSW, she's I would say she has super-like powers that others look at her and scratch their head as to how she got so much done. She often and frequently opts out of doing things for herself, especially when someone close to her needs or wants something. So it is really that mixed feeling again of doing too much and not doing enough. And she also has that feeling of perhaps things that she once enjoyed, she doesn't enjoy so much anymore. But many of my clients, even ones who have chosen not to have children or do not have children, have the same experience and the same feeling of expectations and demands. So she is that get it done attitude. And again, she frequently opts out of things that she once enjoyed just because they feel a burden of something else that she has to do. So she has that get it done, make it happen, be the best, give it your all, and then do it again. And at the base of this, at the heart of this, it's an imbalance between obligation and expectation and the lack, and this is a big one, of personal replenishment that leaves many of us OSWs feeling so we just can't catch up with our lives. So in a nutshell, that is what she is. She's well-intentioned, and she's typically an overgiver, and she has a very high bar that she has set for herself. It's that feeling of women ask for it all, so we got it all. But what is that all? What is that piece? Well, we got the career in line, and we're still working on making that happen as far as equal pay for equal work. And we can manage the family. We do that really, really well. In fact, 2/3 of women working outside of the home have school-age children. So they've got a big plate that they have a lot on. And in addition to that, we still make, here's where the economics come in again, about 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. And if you're a woman of color, that drops down to about 63 cents. So we have to work longer. So there's some real concrete reasons why and how a woman in our culture today becomes overscheduled and gets into that busy culture. And once we've adopted that, and once we are doing that on a daily basis, it just becomes our new normal. So this is really what women are facing en masse in an everyday occurrence.
Yeah, I remember reading an article, probably a month back, and it said that for women who work outside the home, they actually work 90 hours a week, and their day, I'm guessing, I'm going from memory here, begins around 6 a.m. approximately and ends around 8:30, 9 p.m. The ending meaning the kids have gone to bed. That's what ending means. It doesn't mean their day is done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly correct. And what's interesting, we touched on this idea of leisure. What's so interesting is that men are busy too. They're just less busy, about 15% less busy, which is about 40 minutes a day. So here's where this starts to get a little, and I always say that this busy culture, it's very layered. There's a lot going on here. And here's what gets interesting is in my practice of 20 plus years, I have never heard one of my male clients say to me, I feel so guilty for going to the gym, or I feel so guilty going to the golf course for 4 hours every Saturday. So guilt gets in there. And I find it fascinating that we as women allow that guilt to get in there, and we feel bad if we're not the ones that not only are taking care of the home life, but all of the we do 80% of what's called non-paid work. And that's why when you said at 8:30 at night, that ends the day. And that's a soft end.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of other things that, are getting done probably till 10 or 11. So we have to just allow ourselves permission, grant ourselves permission to not only take care of ourselves and build in the me time, but it's also having the perspective that it's not an optional equation. This is essential for our wellness. And we know if we take care of ourselves first, not only are we honoring ourselves, by extension, we are caring for others. So and we're teaching those that we want to influence and care for and love how to do the same.
I have to just share with you, this is something that made me smile when you were talking right now. Are you familiar with the vlogger Christina Kuzmic? She makes satires of motherhood.
I am not.
Yeah, anyway, she's hilarious. Any moms with young children are probably familiar with her. But she did a video recently where she went and interviewed men with their children, walking into a store or in a restaurant. And she just asked them the question, how do you balance it all? And and each time the man would kind of look at her like, what do you mean? And then she would say something like, have you ever been asked how you balance it all? And he would say, actually, no. And so the irony was how men are never asked, how do you do it all? How do you balance this? Yet this is a question that comes up for women. There are blog posts about this. How do you balance it all? And I just thought that was so interesting that when she did this video that, the men didn't even understand the question.
Yeah, because as you said, it hasn't been posed because we're balancing it for them.
Right.
And again, I always want to say this too, because I think it's really important that men and women, we're in this together.
Yes,
so
we
men
are
listening to this,
Yeah.
your program right now is they'll get a really good insight into what women are facing, what the women in their life are facing each day. The solutions and the practices in the books, anybody can do those, and they would be valuable for anyone to adopt because they're going to improve communication and a sense of well-being, and I believe increase your happiness meter, because I think that's really important to have ways to bring gratitude in your life so that you can experience more happiness. And that again will trickle out as well. So we can take a page from men's playbooks and allow ourselves the permission to go and take care of ourselves without carrying along the guilt. Put it down. I mean, give it a structure in your mind as far as what guilt looks like, and then consciously choose to leave it behind, because there's just no space for it. It won't do anything that is going to be positive or beneficial. So permission granted. Take care of yourself. It's essential.
So in your book, I love that you described the different types of traps that women can fall into. Can you perhaps share about two of them?
Absolutely. So I would say traps are really, they grow and they're fed off of the shoulds of life. So we get ourselves into this quagmire of muck, so to speak, and that is how the trap gets set. So yeah, I talk about 4 of them in the book. One of them is called being all, and then the keeping up. We all know what that feels like. That's that comparison game. Saying yes, which is a big trap for a lot of women, because early on we're not really taught to be proactive or confident in our healthy no. So we're kind of taught to be nice, get along, smile, don't make waves. And that leads us to constantly being kind of a yeser all the time. So many women find that a challenge. And then the overgiving, which I think is a big piece as well. I think that's really a vein that runs through much of what we do, because we're caregivers and nurturers. But the being all trap, the allure is the praise, and that confirms acceptance. So it's more is always better kind of in this trap. So setting the trap is the need for reassurance, affirmation, and acknowledgement. And don't we all like that? But this is particular. So the trap is not just the ordinary desire for those things. This is what really drives the behavior and creates this trap for this woman or individual. And so the people or the women in this be it all trap apply an enormous amount of pressure on herself to be everything to everyone. So she's the fixer and the problem solver. So her breakout solutions would not only be to slow down. And by the way, the other day I was having a conversation with somebody about this again. How can you ask us to slow down? We're too busy to slow down. And I remember one of the people I was speaking with said Gandhi, when he had a particularly busy, packed schedule, meditated twice the amount of time that he normally would. So it's about clearing the mental space, creating the landscape that you want to work from and be in. So that breakout solution is slow down and be mindful of your needs and wants without the approval of others. And what intangibles, this is again a little part of the mindfulness, what intangibles are missing in her life that she is trying to fill up with this busyness? And another breakout solution would be, and this is something we can all adopt, lighten up. Give yourself a break. You don't have to be all to everybody all the time. And it is okay if not everyone likes us.
Yeah. Wow. It's so powerful. And I know that you really go into this more deeply in your book about, our motivations for the busyness, with when you talk about these intangibles, that's what that kind of brought to mind for me. What we're not aware of, what our behaviors, what our actions are actually trying to achieve. It's not really about what we're seeing.
Well said. And we get stuck in that loop where we don't define it and we just kind of say, I don't know, it's just something that bothers me, or I don't know, it's just something I'm afraid of. And then that we get stuck at that space. And when we unwrap that a bit and ask ourselves some simple yet really clear questions, we can move from that. I have an exercise that I do about moving through fear. It's really, for me, I'm very visual. So for this exercise, it's a combination of the Neuro Linguistic Programming and mindfulness, where, if you're facing something that you're really fearful about, imagine that there's a line in front of you on the ground and you're on one side and fear is on the other side and you're facing that fear. So if I stay in that place, I will never move through that fear. I'll never cross the line. So how do I do that? I've got to acknowledge it. And what I do is I say hello to it after I've acknowledged it. And then I say goodbye to it and walk through it. Now, I'm not talking about terrors or traumas. I'm talking about, let's say you are scheduled to speak before 2,000 people, or you're scheduled to speak at your child's kindergarten class. No matter what it is, put yourself on that one side of that fear. Choose the solution that you want and create that moment of what you want to feel like, and then walk through that, because that's how you're going to get on the other side. And if you're uncomfortable about doing something, and I'm talking about healthy uncomfortable, not about jumping off the side of or out of an airplane, which I would never do, whatever it might be that you're facing, just take a moment and define that. Because when you bring fear or discomfort out in the light and expose that and see it and define it, then you can move through it. So, and that also helps us discover our motivations. And when we have a value attached to those motivations, then we're more likely going to be successful with what outcome we're trying to create.
So you also help women identify what type of overscheduled woman they are. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So there's 5 types that I talk about in the book. And the first one is the pleaser, which seems to be a real prevalent one. The time optimist, she's the one that always thinks she has a little bit more time to get everything done. Again, it's that feeling and that idea of I can do it all, I can be it all. And, and then her time gets really wrapped up and she ends up feeling really frustrated because of it. The perfectionist, which is my particular one that I have worked through. The sorority sister, she's the one that can bring a group together. And again, her little piece here that she gets stuck on and kind of trips over is she identifies so beautifully with the group. So she's a real great one to have as far as encouraging and getting the team going and making things happen. But without that appraisal or appreciation, she finds herself feeling as though she doesn't really matter. So she relies a lot on what those experiences are, and she needs to discover a little bit more about herself as an individual separate from the group. And then the last one is the alpha. So on one extreme to the other, there's the pleaser, and she is the one to call in a crunch. She's generous, she's willing to help, she's dependable. And again, she prides herself on that I can attitude. I can get it done. And so she spends a lot of time consequently doing things for other people. And in the process, she finds it difficult to allow herself to do things for herself and also to allow others to do things for herself, for her. And on the other end of the spectrum is the alpha, and she's that natural leader with a magnetic personality, strong communicator, highly motivated and confident. And she doesn't like to fail. And there's a little bit of a fear of just being average for her. So if that gets in her way or she doesn't keep that in check, she can get overly competitive and overly aggressive, and that will push people away from her. So for her to create more strong, intimate boundaries, she's got to allow herself to be a little bit more vulnerable, give the limelight to somebody else, although she's very good about encouraging people. It's a very dynamic personality. But lighten up again. As I said, we can all learn to lighten up on ourselves and just let someone else take the lead, and do that in a way and in an environment and with people that she feels very confident and comfortable with, her inner circle. So this is a way that she can start to let those kind of guards drop just a bit, so she can create that deeper intimacy with her relationships and lighten up on herself.
Yeah, you know what I love too about how you pulled this all together in your book is, for whatever type of overscheduled woman you are, you also go into detail about what are the traps that she finds herself in, which you've been sharing right now as well. But for our listeners, Yvonne really does a great job of just letting you know exactly what traps you are hanging out in, depending on what type of overscheduled woman you are.
Well, for instance, in that Being All, one of the exercises in there is the self-compassion exercise. And I've gotten a lot of feedback on that particular one, because I think as women, we're so geared towards being, which I think is a beautiful quality. And I don't want women to ever, ever forget that we can be strong and soft, and that we can be gentle and assertive. We can be confident and have high self-esteem and still be vulnerable. We can be all of those things. And so if we can keep that in mind, that's going to allow us to share compassion within ourselves, because that's really where it starts. We can be compassionate to others, which we often are. We accept other people when they're not perfect. We'll help somebody who is struggling. And, even when someone isn't doing, quote, their best, we still are going to be encouraging to them. But often what happens, Lourdes, is we don't do it for ourselves. So practicing self-compassion, and I give a list of questions in the book to be able to move through that, 4 or 5 questions. And you're going to start to open up your awareness and your self-acceptance. And that's really important for being able to break this busy kind of pace that so many of us are in. That one thing about just allowing ourselves to a little bit more self-compassion and self-acceptance.
And I think, again, I'm listening from the perspective of, sitting with clients in a therapeutic or counseling session, and that negative critical voice, again, the shoulds, like you mentioned, but I should do this, or the what ifs. That's another one that's really big with anxiety. That self-compassion piece is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And when you talk about the shoulds, I always, when I'm working with a client, one of the things that's so freeing, and when we change that word should to could, everything shifts. I should be less busy. We feel like, oh, just one more thing I have to do. But how about I could be more busy? It opens up a wider gate, so to speak, for possibilities to exist. And, you tapped on that anxiety, which is such a big part of our culture. And I have to give, kind of a shout out to the millennials. I have a millennial daughter, and one of the conversations that we have quite often is that she'll share with me, it's just the tension and anxiety that so many millennials feel nowadays. And what they've done is they have brought it to the surface. They are not embarrassed about it. Talk about oversharers. This is the upside of the oversharing. Thank you that the millennials have brought us. And by the way, I think they get a bad rap as being lazy and not interested. I think they're incredibly dynamic group of generation. But this anxiety they've really allowed it to come to the surface, and they're looking at it and they're sharing it, which is reducing that stigma that in my generation, you never talked about that. It's just, again, it was that I'm fine, I'm perfect, everything is good. So that imagination, that what if, that's where we use our imagination in a non-resourceful way. And this is one of the things I talk about in the book is let's use imagination as a tool, because we're already using it every day without even being aware of it. And that is in that, what if this happens? What if she says that? What if they do this? And so what I try to help people do, what I want them to be able to have, is a method for turning that around into that story that they want to create, rather than that part of being the what if scenario. So in other words, if again, I'll use the example of speaking before a group of people. Well, what if my mic goes out? Or what if I fall off the stage? By the way, I've done that. Or what if? Rather than spending our time with all those what ifs, let's take 3 minutes before we walk out onto that stage, or even 3 minutes for the week leading up to that, and put that imagination into use by creating exactly the experience that we want to have. And that's just another form of using imagination and storytelling in guided meditation. It's very powerful, very successful, and I find it works very well in a multitude of situations.
That was so helpful, Yvonne, everything you just shared right now. I was just like, this is such good stuff. And you just have so much more in the book, but I really love that changing it from should to could. I mean, wow, it just, you feel it immediately when you do that.
Yeah, it lightens things up, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I was doing that in my head. I'm like, oh, wow, I really like this one.
Good.
And one of the things I also wanted to touch on, as I was going through the section on the busy busting solutions, I really loved the one on, the flip. And you had the words that you could change, different words that you can use. Instead of a problem, it's a opportunity, things like that. And I think that's so important because language is so powerful because, again, the words we use, the words we choose do create, to an extent, our experience and our feelings. And so if you're able to begin to flip those around, just like what you did with the should to a could, I mean, that is so powerful. So I just, of course, there are so many solutions that are wonderful, but that one I just wanted to tell you was kind of one of my favorites.
Oh, good. I find it works very well. I found it to work very well for me and my business partner when we had a real dramatic situation when our business was flooded, and we made a very conscious effort to turn that whole thing around and flip everything so that it would be a positive experience. And so when we look back on that, we find that as an experience that we were able to grow from rather than one that took us down. And you're so right, Lourdes. Words are so powerful. And the way we speak to ourselves, not just the way we speak to others, but it starts with how we speak to ourselves. And you touched on that critical voice earlier. One of the techniques we use in Neuro Linguistic Programming is we delve into that negative voice. What does it sound like? Where is it coming from? Where are you hearing it? What part of your body is it resonating from? And so when we explore that and, again, move from that space of fearfulness or anxiousness and move into a space of exploration, when we think of ourselves as an explorer, and we become curious rather than doubtful, it changes our whole approach to how we're going to solve a situation or come up with a solution.
Yeah, and I love that what you said about the word curious. There's another way of working in therapy, and the approach is internal family systems. I won't go into it in detail, but one of the aspects of it is curiosity, because when you're curious about a situation, you can stay connected to it. Like you don't disconnect. You're not detached. You're present, because the word explorer is a great description. You're trying to deepen your understanding, your knowledge about a situation, an experience, and that by doing that, you're connected to it. So for me, I always think of curiosity and connection together.
Yes, and there's been even studies about how when we have a curious mindset, how it helps us also to think more clearly and to be in a space, and also helps us calm down as well. So being curious, and how often have you been in a conversation that might be tense and somebody says, well, what do you mean by that? What if they change? What do you think when somebody says that? Well, immediately the defense goes up. But if someone were to take a breath and say, I'm curious about that, tell me more. And I want to also pause here and just say, coming from an open heart and from a place of generosity is so important. So I'm not talking about manufacturing responses, but to have a mindset behind them about being genuinely curious and open to what someone's perspective is, rather than pushing at them our perspective. Now, if we're negotiating a business deal, it still works really well to bring in that curious mind, because we're going to remain, as you said, not only connected, we're going to also stay open open to other options and opportunities. Because when we start to get on the defensive, we shut down our ability to think clearly because we become tense. And we know what happens to the brain when we become tense. We can't think as clearly. We start to increase all that good stuff or decrease all the good stuff and bring up that cortisol, which is produced from that stress and anxiety. And then our thinking gets cloudy. So being able to stay in a curious mind is really kind of healthy for you. And it's certainly healthy for our communications.
Yvonne, if we have a listener who this is really speaking to her and she would like to begin to make some changes right away, what are some things you would suggest for her to begin as soon as she finishes listening to this episode, she can do these immediately?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is going to sound counterintuitive, and that is to slow down. And what I mean by that is slow down the way you talk, slow down the way you walk, slow down the way you drive. And what will happen from that is you will become very aware of your pace and what it feels like. And it is an interesting exercise just to try those first three things. And if I could encourage, it's really important. I talk about the 3-minute meditation. I think this is one of the most valuable tools that is still underutilized because people say, I don't have time to meditate. It feels like something else I have to do. I don't know how to meditate. Well, meditation isn't something we do. It's a way of being. And it's like anything else. The more we practice it, the better we'll get at it. So that's why I say adopt that 1 to 3 minute meditation practice every day. We all have 1 minute. We all have 3 minutes. We spend an average of 20 minutes a day looking for our car keys, unless you're me, and then you might spend even more time. But it's important that we take this small bite approach to when we're shifting. So the first thing is slow down, and slow down those 3 things and observe how you feel when you do that. Keep your big picture in mind. Take 1 minute to 3 minutes a day to meditate what it is you want to bring into your life, not what you fear, but what you want to create. Start focusing on what you want to create. And I always say start your day with a mantra, because a mantra, again, works on that unconscious, subconscious level. Today, I want clarity and fun. And that might sound frivolous, but I will guarantee you your day will have more clarity and you'll look for the fun in that day. So start it with a mantra. And those would be the things I would say to begin with, because they're doable. You don't need to purchase anything to make them happen. They're all present and available in you right now in this very moment.
Yvonne, this has been just such an inspiring and uplifting and helpful conversation. I just love all of the insights along with the practical, concrete steps that someone can take. And I know this is going to be invaluable to our listeners. Thank you so much for your time today and, just sharing your expertise. It's just been wonderful.
Thank you, Lourdes. It's been my pleasure.
Before we wrap up, what is the best way for listeners to get in touch with you, find out more about your work?
Yes. So my website is Yvonne Tally. That's YVONNE, Tally, TALLY.com. And everything is right there on my website.
And again, for our listeners, Yvonne's book, Breaking Up with Busy, Real Life Solutions for Overscheduled Women. It is chock full of steps, strategies that you can start on right away. It's not a difficult book to get through. I just feel like it's something that will be helpful to you as a woman, and if not to you, to a woman that you love. There's someone in your life who could benefit from this book. So again, thank you so much, Yvonne. I'm very excited to share our conversation with the world.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. You can follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And finally, if you enjoy Women in Depth, please share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.